Hi, folks. It's Joe Lum here. It's another Monday and another Joe Lum album review. This is episode 45, and this week I will be reviewing Def Leppard's Adrenalize. When you're done watching this video, you can go back and watch previous album review episodes. The playlist is in the description box. Yesterday on my album rankings episode, where I ranked the 10 best metal albums of 1992. This album was ranked number 3, and I'm going to explain to you why that is by giving you the backstory behind the making of Adrenalize. See, Def Leppard had faced long delays before, and the challenge of drummer Rick Allen losing his arm while making their previous record, Hysteria. I covered that on episode 10 of my album review series. You can go check that out yourself. And while trying to follow up on the success of Pyromania, which was released in 1983. They also faced the prospect of doing so without a producer, Robert John Mutt Lange. He was already working with Bryan Adams on the album Waking Up the Neighbors. At the same time, guitarist Steve Clark had been suffering from alcohol addiction since 1989, spending 6 sessions in rehab. Clark was involved with writing 6 of the songs on the album, but was given an ultimatum over his alcoholism in September of 1990 and put on a 6-month leave of absence. Sadly, Clark died 4 months later in January of 1991. The band tried to continue the recording process, going back into the studio the day after Clark's death to cope with the loss, but it took a few months before they were able to work to what they felt was a satisfactory standard. Instead of replacing Clark with a new member, the band recorded the album as a 4-piece. According to lead guitarist Phil Collen, we had recorded demos on multitrack. I was sitting there with him when he played the original parts. I could relay that, but it was like playing along to a ghost. This was also the band's first record since On Through the Night in 1980, not to be produced by Mutt Lange. Instead, the band took matters in their own hands and produced the album themselves, along with longtime engineer Mike Shipley, with Lange credited as executive producer. According to frontman Joe Elliott, we coped without Mutt quite well. Mutt was in his studio in Guildford with Bryan Adams, and we'd be in Dublin talking every day. But it wasn't as adventurous as Hysteria. It was more of a rock album, less experimental. It's like with Pink Floyd to me. Adrenalize was our Wish You Were Here, and Hysteria was our Dark Side of the Moon. Okay, let's get to the track listing. Let's Get Rocked opens the album, written by Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, Robert John Mutt Lange, and Rick Savage. Clocks in at 4:56. Heaven Is, written by Steve Clark, Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, Mutt Lange, and Rick Savage. Clocks in at 3:33. Make Love Like a Man, written by Clark, Collen, Elliott, and Lange. Clocks in at 4:15. Tonight, written by Clark, Collen, Elliott, Lange, and Savage. Clocks in at 4:03. White Lightning, which is a song dedicated to Steve Clark on this record, was written by Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, Mutt Lange, and Rick Savage. Clocks in at 7:03. Stand Up, Kick Love and Emotion, written by Steve Clark, Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, and Mutt Lange. Clocks in at 4:32. Personal Property, written by Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, Mutt Lange, and Rick Savage. Clocks in at 4:21. Have You Ever Needed Someone So Bad, written by Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, and Mutt Lange. Clocks in at 5:25. I Want to Touch You, written by Rick Allen, Steve Clark, Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, and Mutt Lange. Clocks in at 3:37. And Tear It Down, written by Steve Clark, Phil Collen, Joe Elliott, and Rick Savage. Clocks in at 3:38. Adrenalize is the 5th studio album by Def Leppard, released on March 31st, 1992 through Mercury Records. It is the first album by the band recorded without guitarist Steve Clark, who died in 1991. Although most songs were written and partially demoed before his death, they were re-recorded solo by Phil Collen in that year. It is the only album recorded by Def Leppard as a 4-member band, spawning 7 singles, 4 of them Let's Get Rocked, Make Love Like a Man, Have You Ever Needed Someone So Bad, and Stand Up, Kick Love and Emotion were major hits. Tear It Down is a re-recorded of a song written during sessions following the completion of the Hysteria album, and released as a B-side for the album's single Women in 1987. The song received radio airplay and was performed by the band live at the 1989 MTV Video Music Awards. As mentioned, White Lightning is dedicated to the memory of Clark, who has writing credits on 6 of the album's 10 tracks. Adrenalize debuted at number 1 on both the UK Albums Chart and the US Billboard 200. It stayed at number 1 on the Billboard charts for 5 weeks, keeping Bruce Springsteen's Human Touch off the top spot, and spent 65 weeks on the charts in total. The album received mixed reviews. Some critics praised its production values and it's instantly catchy with radio-friendly material, while others called it tired and formulaic. In a 4-star review for Rolling Stone, J.D. Considine wrote, "Adrenalize is so relentlessly catchy that it almost seems as if the band is about to abandon its heavy metal roots for greener fields into hard pop." Other reviewers also noted that the album's less metal sound and pointed out its lack of cohesion. A staff writer for Sputnik Music said that despite the slick production, the album doesn't match the standards set by the previous 2 records, which they refer to as masterpieces. In writing in 2009, after Pyromania and Adrenalize have been reissued, Toby Cook of The Quietist said that despite Adrenalize's many flaws, the record-buying public of 1992 cared not. Indeed, the album would go on to sell more than 7 million copies worldwide, remaining Def Leppard's last studio album to achieve major mainstream success. My overall rating for Def Leppard's Adrenalize is an 85 out of 100. This would be the last album that Def Leppard had achieved mainstream success with. And to be honest with you, I have to agree with some of the critics saying that despite the slick production, I think the formula was starting to wear out on them by this time. They weren't the same without Steve Clark anyway. But you know what? Vivian Campbell, who was an Irish guitarist that before joining Def Leppard was a member of Dio and Whitesnake, had joined the band about a few weeks after Adrenalize was released. And he's been with the band ever since. So I think they did all right. I think they really did all right. Even though I do think that Adrenalize was not at the level of Pyromania and Hysteria before that. This has been Joe Loam's album review for this Monday.
Don't